Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of the Dove Valley Deep Divers with Erick Trickel and Lance Sanderson. It is so hot off the press that we don't even have an intro song announcing the hosts. What you are getting though is an illuminating football conversation between two of the biggest deep divers in Broncos country. These dudes are going to go deep for you. Without further ado, here's Erick Trickel and Lance Sanderson.
Mile high hello, everybody in Broncos country. My name is Lance Sanderson, and I am very excited to introduce you guys to the very first ever episode of the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. Joining me as my co-host in this endeavor is your Denver Broncos insider and Mile High Huddle's senior draft analyst, Erick Trickel. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Sorry about that. It was just so used to doing a podcast and doing that intro that it just kind of came out, and I'm just super excited to be back and doing the podcast, and just glad to have a host. I'm really excited to go forward doing this with you, man. It's gonna be some great times.
Yeah, man, I'm very excited. I've had a blast doing a couple of episodes with Nick and Carl on the Building the Broncos football pod. I'd like to get on with Chad and Zach if I could sometime. But mostly, I'm just excited to start a project with you. You're a very smart, intelligent football guy. You obviously have the inside information coming out of Dove Valley and all throughout the NFL. So being able to utilize that and our extensive football knowledge on the Denver Broncos, I think it's going to turn into a pretty good show. What do you think, man?
I agree, and thank you for the compliment. What little bit of your work I've read and everything, and just the little bit of time I've gotten to know you, you're very knowledgeable about football, and very excited, as I said before, to get going forward. I'm going to be being able to have different people's takes, and all the debates and arguments and all that stuff that comes with it. This is something that I've missed doing, and I've been trying to get it back up and going for months now, and just... Man, I keep talking about it because I'm just so excited to finally be back and doing this.
Yeah, man, you and I have been talking about doing this for quite some time now, a couple months of getting everything figured out so that we could start recording and put a new podcast out for all Broncos country. I finally just got a computer, so now we can actually get started on everything. But what was going to be the primary focus of this podcast? You're kind of the head guy of this whole deal, so I'll let you take it away here.
Well, Dove Valley Deep Divers, what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be covering all sorts of things, and we're going to give you the deep dive takes. We're going to be diving into all the news that you have, and we're just going to be digging in deep into it, what it means for everybody. I know Chad and Zach, they cover all this new stuff and everything like that, but we're going to go even deeper. We're going to go into the draft and stuff, and we're going to go deeper into building the Broncos that are going deeper than what the guys at Building the Broncos do. We're just going deep dive analysis, deep dive takes, just everything super deep into the Broncos country, and we are at least aiming to be that one podcast that you go to that really gets you that deep analysis. If you can't tell, with Dove Valley Deep Divers, that's our whole goal, is we want to go deep into everything Broncos, break it all down, and all that jazz. Try not to step on toes, because Chad and Zach, they've got a great podcast. Carl and Nick, they have a great podcast. And just, we wanted to go and just, again, give those deep takes. That's something that we have tried to build Mile High Huddle on. And I think that having a podcast that follows that model that we've set up at Mile High Huddle of deep diving and being able to just have people listen to it instead of having to take the time to read it, and being able to listen to it while they're driving somewhere, working out, whatever. Being able to get these deep dive takes, that's our goal.
Yeah, that is the mantra for Mile High Huddle. That is the one thing that you get when you get a VIP subscription, or what you used to get when we were back on 24/7. Now moving forward to the Maven, we want to give you even more deep dive analysis and allow everybody to be able to get that analysis from myself and from you. And hopefully we can get Nick and Carl and Chad and everybody involved on the podcast as well. But today, we're going to be taking a deep dive analysis look at the Denver Broncos roster and how it looks as a whole. Some players that are pushing for a spot on the 53-man roster, who's playing their way off of it. It's not exactly a 53-man roster projection, but more of an outlook and thoughts on what the Broncos can do to help build this roster.
Fantasy football fans, listen up. Do you want to join the biggest NFL season-long tournament ever? Of course you do. If you love fantasy football, we know you do, then you need to enter the $3.5 million Best Ball Championship on Draft. That's right, $3.5 million in real money. It's freaking huge. Now, it's season long. Here's how draft works. It's season long, but with no micromanagement. You just set it and forget it. So what does that mean? No longer are you having to agonize over the matchups and who to start and all that. They take care of that for you. They're automatically going to start your most efficient lineup based on all the projections, based on all the momentum, so you don't have to worry about it. You set it, you forget it. Once you're done drafting, that's it. No trades, no waiver wire. You don't even have to set your lineup. As mentioned, your best players automatically get started, and you'll get the best score each and every week, guaranteed. For a limited time only, you can get a free entry into the Best Ball Championship when you make your first deposit, but you have to use our promo code HUDDLE. That's right, a free shot at $1 million just by using our promo code HUDDLE when you make your first deposit on Draft. Just search Draft in the App Store or go to draft.com and come play free with promo code HUDDLE.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Starting off today's episode, we're going to dive into the quarterback position. It's obviously the most important position in all of sports, at least arguably the most important position in all of sports. And right at the very top of the list, we have Joe Flacco, 10-year veteran, Super Bowl MVP, Super Bowl champion, elite quarterback? Question mark?
Yeah, it's definitely a big question mark with that. But the thing that I'm looking at more so with the quarterback position is looking at a projected 53-man roster, the impact that Locke's injury has on it. The Broncos, from what I have been able to hear, were very keen and going away from keeping a third quarterback because of how well Locke has played. But now he's out. He's going to be missing some time. And, I mean, they may put him on injured reserve, but that's kind of messy situation there because he's not going to miss that much time. He's going to miss a couple weeks at most, 3-4 weeks. I mean, I think from everything I've seen is 4 weeks is about the max that they're expecting him to miss. And quite frankly, Kevin Hogan, he just hasn't cut it as the backup quarterback for when he was getting the shot. He has been terrible this whole preseason and in practice. So this Locke injury just is a really bummer for just the roster. I mean, they're going to be cutting a talent elsewhere now that they have to keep three quarterbacks. My hope is that Brett Rippon is able to come around, beat out Kevin Hogan, and at least take the backup job for now. Do I think it'll happen? No, but that is my hope.
Hogan has been not good in camp, throwing a lot of interceptions. He was probably the best looking quarterback of the three that did play in the Hall of Fame game, but it's the Hall of Fame game. You're playing against third and fourth stringers on an extra preseason game that doesn't matter to anybody or anything involved. Now, Rippon hasn't exactly played very much. He looked pretty good that drive that he had towards the end of the Hall of Fame game. He threw that touchdown pass, tip drill touchdown pass, probably could have been put in a better spot, but he did play fairly well at that time. He hasn't really seen any action since then. Now, the Locke injury has a significant impact on the roster math because, of course, like you said, they have to bring in that third quarterback. Hogan, being the experienced veteran, is more likely to take that spot over Rippon, but I don't really see it as a win either way. If it's Hogan or Rippon, I don't necessarily see it as a win for the Broncos. Getting Drew Lock back healthy after the first couple weeks of the season is not necessarily paramount, but it's definitely going to be something the Broncos are going to be looking forward to moving into 2019.
Yeah, and here's my big thing with that is if they keep Brett Rippon, what happens when Locke comes back? Do you really want? Are they going to cut him? Or do you really want two rookies backing up the veteran? What I think ends up happening is I don't think Kevin Hogan or Brett Rippon make it. I think that they're trying to sneak Brett Rippon onto the practice squad, and I think that they go pick up a veteran from elsewhere and bring him in to back up Joe Flacco. That's what I think is going. And speaking of injuries and Drew Lock's injury, how it affects the roster, there's also two pretty big ones that happened at the running back fullback position with Theo Riddick and Andy Janovich. Theo Riddick was brought in to be that third down back takeover for basically Devontae Booker, and then Andy Janovich was set to have a pretty sizable role, at least everybody expected it anyways, at the fullback position, but now they're both done. George Aston, he's had to really step up and take over for Andy Janovich, and he actually hasn't played that bad. I actually came away pretty like, it wasn't a great game, but I came away pretty impressed with how he played in all his whole preseason, but especially against the 49ers. And then back at the running backs, it's basically, if they really want to keep Theo Riddick around, then they got to keep 4 running backs. And with Andy Janovich, are they just going to go fullback, or do they go with someone with a tight end? They did just bring in another tight end who has played that fullback role in Orson Charles, and we'll talk about him more in a little bit. But injuries are such a bummer in the preseason because of just how much of an impact it has on the 53-man roster, especially when it's these 3 injuries to Locke, Riddick, and Janovich are injuries that are only going to put them out just for the first few weeks of the season, because then injured reserve just kind of becomes harder to just do, because with the new rules about it, you can bring any 2 players back off of injured reserve, but it has to be after 8 weeks. And to do that, they have to make the initial 53-man roster.
Yeah, losing Janovich is kind of a big blow, especially to not only the Broncos offense, but to their special teams unit. Going back to Brock Olivo 2017, he said the Broncos, quote, had 22 Janos out there, they'd be all right, end quote, more or less. And he's always been a very good blocker, and whenever he gets his hands on the football, it seems like he does make very big plays. However, putting a fullback on injured reserve and then trying to bring him back off, not exactly the best way to go going about building a roster. With Aston and the way that he's been playing, especially as you did say against the 49ers, he had a very good game, had a very nice catch against Seattle as well for a first down. I think it was in the 3rd quarter. But another potential answer is obviously Orson Charles, but Troy Fumagalli. Troy Fumagalli saw some time at fullback as well in this preseason, and he's been playing pretty well as well. The position versatility, having a tight end that can play at the fullback position, is definitely going to be something that the Broncos are going to look at. Now, with Theo Riddick, the broken shoulder injury that he has definitely hurts the Broncos' 4-man rotation, and I do expect them to take 4 men in with Philip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, and Devontae Booker, Riddick being probably a step above Booker as a pass catcher. Obviously as a pass catcher, but in the rotation because of so. Now, with Riddick being hurt and not being able to make the beginning of the season, he's going to have to be that game day inactive running back. How do you go about the rest of the roster moving forward with having a 4th running back that's not going to see any time for possibly the first 3 weeks?
That's exactly the issue with that, is how can you justify cutting, say, a 6th receiver who can be a returner and then having to stick Booker back there to be a returner just to keep Theo Riddick? That's, again, it's just the injuries and all the issues that come with that. And with skipping over receivers we'll come back to that, but going to the tight ends, and you mentioned Troy Fumagalli. Troy Fumagalli is not a good blocker. I'm not sure I want him back there in that fullback role. I mean, I watched that and broke down that San Francisco game, and man, he just barely, in my grades, he just barely got out of being on the bad side. Just barely got out of it. And it was not a good showing from him as a blocker. And plus, for as good and highly touted his hands are that we've seen in practice, at least last year and early this offseason, hasn't been seen. I mean, he had 1 drop in one of the games already, and then in practice he's had a couple drops as well. He's gotten a lot of hype, but we haven't seen it on the field yet. So I think that Troy Fumagalli will make the roster, but I don't think that if they go tight end who can play fullback, I don't think it'll be him. I think that it will be looking at Jeff Hireman or Orson Charles, and that's also going to throw a wrinkle in there with what do they do with Jake Butt. Jake Butt's been dealing with an injury. He's trying to come back from his ACL injury that he suffered almost a year ago. So it's actually quite possible that we could see Jake Butt go on injured reserve, let him take this year to continue to recover from the ACL and get back into shape and everything like that, and then try to come back next year and make an impact.
Speaking to Butt, honestly, I think that he would probably be a really good candidate to go on injured reserve and then have him be designated to come back off. After the first 8 weeks of the season, yes, it really kind of sucks. He has to be on there for the initial 53-man roster. But that tight end position has already been nicked up badly by injuries already this year. Obviously, with Butt, you have Austin Fort, the undrafted rookie out of Wyoming, torn ACL. Bug Howard just went on injured reserve with an ankle injury. Now Noah Fant Broncos first-round pick, has a sprained ankle. It's probably not going to be anything super significant, but it could be something that could cause some issues going forward and later on down the season at over 16 games. Putting Butt on IR, letting him get fully healthy, letting him get his knees back together, so to speak, and then come back off the roster after Week 8 could be a big boost to the Broncos offense, especially given Jake Butt's receiving prowess.
I can see that. I still think that it would be a little bit better just waiting until next year, but you make a great point about the injuries at the tight end position. The only tight end that hasn't gotten banged up is Morrill Stevens. That he's the only one. I mean, not counting Orson Charles, whom they just brought in, but of all the other tight ends, they've all suffered some sort of injury. Troy Fumagalli missed a few days of practice. Jeff Hireman, he was held out of the game against San Francisco because I think he's dealing with a shoulder injury. I can't remember exactly what it is, but he's dealing with something, and he has a pretty extensive injury history. So Jake Butt potentially going on injured reserve and bringing him back, that's definitely a possibility. And especially with the cap space the Broncos have, they can't really afford to put him on injured reserve and then go get another tight end. I mean, and if they do, it's not going to be anybody worth something. I mean, unless they're able to get like Jermaine Gresham or Deion Sims to take a really cheap deal, basically a vet minimum, and come in with that. I mean, outside of that, there's not many tight ends left. So they're definitely in a tough spot, and injuries, again, just continue to put them in a tougher spot. And then at the receiver position, they're actually pretty well off there. They have their top 5 running backs: Sanders, Sutton, Hamilton, Winfrey, and Patrick. That's a pretty good top 5, and we've seen them all perform this preseason. We've seen them all step up and make a play, especially Emmanuel Sanders, which is great to see him come back from that injury he suffered, and as quick as he did, to make the impact that he has. But they got to find somebody to be a returner, and I think that it needs to be from this receiver group. And McKnight and Williams, they both muffed a punt. Brendan Langley, he's muffed a punt. The guy I want to see, and I will keep pounding this table until he gets a shot as a returner, is Trinity Benson. I dug so hard to try to find just even highlights of Trinity Benson, and I managed to find one full game clip of his and a bunch of highlights. And granted, it was at a small school, very small school. He was so explosive with the ball in his hands. I would like to see him at least get a shot as a returner. Do I think that he'll be the answer? I don't know. But nobody knows until he gets a shot. He's something that he's done before. He got a couple shots early on in the offseason, and word is that he looked good doing it. So I'm trying to figure out why it hasn't happened in games so far. And also, just to throw this out there, I absolutely am annoyed that the Broncos have 12 receivers on their roster. They have a top 5, and so that leaves the other 7 of these receivers to fight for maybe one spot. They don't need 7 receivers to fight for one spot. They can cut most of them, cut bait, and just move on.
That'll probably happen directly coming into this first set of cuts, honestly. With McKnight and Williams probably being among the first ones there. Another guy that we probably need to talk about and give at least some kind of a mention to, River Craycraft. He's has the punt returning ability from not necessarily ability, but he was the punt returner last year for a little bit. He's a possible option as a slot receiver for the Broncos as the number 6 guy. I don't necessarily see that playing out, but he's still there and needs to be talked about at least.
And just those correction out there, NFL teams no longer have 2 cut downs. They just have the one. They have a 2-day span, and it's coming up on August 31st, where they have to cut down from 90 to 53 men. And speaking of River Craycraft, he showed some potential last year. I think that fans kind of overreacted to what he showed because he didn't touch the ball that often. He bounced back and forth early on in the season between the roster and the practice squad and off the practice squad and all that jazz. But my thing is they've been trying to find a returner, so if he was it, I would think that he would have the job pretty much cemented right now. And he's not getting much opportunities in the preseason games to show that he could be a returner. So that's kind of my issue that I have with River Craycraft and everything. I can see them keeping him around at least for now, but it's just hard to see him continue to stay on this roster because of the fact that he's just not getting the opportunities.
Yeah, and with the way that Trinity Benson has been playing in the preseason games, he's kind of flashed pretty well. I've was impressed. He had a couple of nice catches. I think it was against San Francisco. Had a couple of deep targets. They're actually trying to make him a part of the offense, even though it is the third and fourth string offense. But they are making him a focus. Maybe you actually have a point there. Let's see what he can do as the punt returner. Why not? They've got to find some kind of an answer somewhere. And punt return duties, not exactly a major issue that the Broncos have. It is an issue. You need to have somebody back there that can maybe spark some life into the offense or get the crowd going again with a big return. But it's not exactly a huge piece of building this roster, more or less. And keeping a sixth receiver to do so, I don't know. You'd have to maybe cut someone else from another position area that's not quite as strong. I think the Broncos have a very strong receiver core with Emmanuel Sanders, Courtland Sutton coming into his own. Deshaun Hamilton, I think, is going to have a pretty big year this year as well. But maybe you have to cut a depth edge rusher or depth outside linebacker. Maybe keep only 5 cornerbacks instead of 6 this year. The roster math is going to play itself out eventually. Benson might be the guy that makes the cut.
And you are right about trying to keep that sixth receiver and just being a punt returner. You want to have them be able to contribute on offense in some way. And you did hit the nail on the head as well with the fact that they have shown that they're trying to at least incorporate Trinity Benson's speed into the offense. We've seen him get multiple shots. He hasn't had that many catches. I think he's only had 1 or 2. But they're definitely taking shots downfield to him. That's something that they actually may have spoken about making a priority in this offense, is taking shots downfield, and he has the speed to take the top off of it. But they got to see what he can do as a returner. And then for the offensive line, they have to figure something out, because this line and this depth is not something that you can go into the season and win with. I mean, you have Garrett Bowles, who's still struggling at left tackle. You have Dalton Reisner, who's a rookie, but he has played pretty well at left guard. Connor McGovern struggling to snap the ball at center, and his play is not as good as it was when he was at right guard. Ron Leary, how many games are you going to get out of him? Are you going to be able to get at least half a season out of him? That's a serious question. In 2 seasons with the Broncos, he's missed 15 games. That's almost a full season. That's not great with how much they're paying him. And then you have Juwan James, who he has struggled, and Denver may have slightly overpaid for him because of the struggles that he's had, and he had a pretty bad game against the 49ers as well. So definitely big concerns there. I mean, it's getting to the point where the depth isn't that great, but do you start considering benching certain players? Do you start considering moving players? Do you consider cutting Ron Leary and trying to free up at least a little bit of money and use that to go bring in a different offensive lineman, a veteran, like say a John Sullivan who can snap the ball? There's just so much that the Broncos have to figure out now. And I don't think they do cut Ron Leary, but it needs to be discussed. And then you also should be at least considering basically sending a message to Garrett Bowles and threatening with him to bench him, or even just benching him and putting Elijah Wilkinson as a starter, or putting Wilkinson at left guard and Reisner at left tackle or something, to send a message that, hey, you're not playing good enough. You need to step it up. You need to get it together, because we can't have what we've seen from Bowles continue on. I have a film article up at Mile High Huddle, and it's talking about his technique. And I make a point in there to say multiple times that his technique has not improved much, if at all, since his rookie year. And that is something that should be concerning every single Broncos fan.
Yeah, if you haven't read that piece, guys, you need to definitely go take a look at it. It is very, very high quality. Nice job, Eric, on that. Bowles definitely needs to figure it out. He's got the good footwork. His footwork is starting to get there, but his hand placement, he has horrible hand placement. He gets perpendicular to the line of scrimmage at times, allowing rushers to get underneath his pad level, and which is, you're automatically dead at that point. He doesn't have any punch right now in the passing game. He can dance around. He's a nimble dancing bear with raw athleticism for his size. But eventually something has to give. The Broncos brought in Mike Munchak, who developed Alejandro Villanueva as an undrafted free agent into one of probably the top 10 left tackles in the game. Bowles, as a first-round draft pick, has all the natural athletic ability, but for some reason it's just not clicking in either the mental aspect or the technique aspect of his game. You kind of brought up some stuff the other day about maybe having some issues with teammates and having issues with work ethic behind the scenes that nobody has really talked about or is really privy to that kind of information, but that might be another issue. he needs to figure it out. Absolutely has to figure it out. Or maybe it's time to see Elijah Wilkinson step into that starting role. And that could be an upgrade or a downgrade. Wilkinson struggled against San Francisco as well. So literally the Broncos have 3 major question marks on their offensive line right now. And who's going to play right guard? Can Connor McGovern figure out how to snap the football and actually do it on a consistent, regular basis? And is left tackle going to be a turnstile once again for the Broncos this year? And with Flacco not necessarily being the most mobile quarterback in the NFL, that's going to be a huge issue for the Broncos' pass protection once again this year.
With the Broncos' concerns about the offensive line, we're probably going to see a lot of bootlegs and rollouts and stuff like that. Get Flacco out of the pocket, help buy some time, and cover up for the offensive line. Get him on the move and try to move the ball that way. We're probably going to see a lot of that because unless this offensive line suddenly takes a drastic turn, it doesn't look like it's going to be good. I mean, Mike Munchak, it's still working with him. They still have 2 weeks to try to get it all together, but they still got a way to go. And before we get to the defensive side of the ball, I just want to let all your listeners know to just make sure you guys have gone to milehighhuddle.com and bookmarked it, and you guys can see all of our written content that comes up from there. And it's just all sorts of stuff. News, deep dive analysis in article form, player breakdowns like my Bulls film piece, all this stuff like that, where you can actually see the play in front of you. That's one thing that we were trying to figure out and talked about trying to do, is breaking down plays all over this podcast to try to do it. But without seeing the play, it makes it a little bit difficult. So that's what we have the articles for. Make sure you guys go, have that bookmarked, and are just checking it daily because there's all sorts of stuff, all sorts of articles, again, news, analysis, film breakdowns, all that stuff that comes out on a regular basis. Now, getting to the defensive line, I think the biggest thing here is that they have 5 with Derek Wolfe, Adam Gotsis, Shelby Harris, Zach Kerr, and Draymond Jones. They're likely to keep 6. Who's that 6th one going to be? Is it going to be DeMarcus Walker, who has stepped it up in practice, but we haven't really seen it in game yet? I mean, he played really well in the Hall of Fame game, but since then he has plummeted to basically falling off the face of the earth. He found the edge of the earth. So where has he gone? But on the other hand, we have seen Deshaun Williams, who he hasn't made some great plays, but he's been pretty consistent. He's been a lot more consistent than Marcus Walker. He's a little bit stronger at the point of attack against the ground, but he doesn't offer as much upside as a pass rusher. And another factor in that has to be considered is Draymond Jones. Draymond Jones was drafted to replace DeMarcus Walker. So are they going to keep 2 of the same players? Because they're very similar. So many concerns. I mean, DeMarcus Walker, I feel bad for him because he's kind of gotten a rough break being in Denver since he drafted. I mean, part of it's his fault, showing up to training camp his rookie year, a little bit underweight. But then he got sick, lost more weight, and the Broncos coaching staff approached to him about moving to edge to try to help him at least see the field and stuff while he gains the weight back. And he was fine with that. Then they moved him back, and everybody knows the story. So he's kind of had a rough break for it. I feel bad for him, but there's no question that he is fighting for a roster spot. And I'll be very curious to see how this actually pans out, because with how they both have played, I mean, yes, Williams has been consistent, but I wouldn't be shocked if they actually tried to find a defensive lineman elsewhere, a veteran guy that they probably get cheap or something, and be able to insert them as that 6th spot to just try to upgrade it a little bit.
The one guy that I thought was coming into camp that actually had a pretty decent shot of dethroning DeMarcus Walker was Billy Wynn, and unfortunately he went down with an injury earlier this year. But speaking to DeMarcus Walker, talk about another guy that absolutely has to step up. As a second-round draft pick, he has been completely invisible on this Broncos roster for the last 2 years. Coming into year 3, he absolutely has to step it up this year, or else he's going to have to find a new home. Plain and simple. He's not going to stick around in Denver very much longer. They're either going to find somebody as a veteran to replace him, or they're just going to move forward with Draymond Jones and possibly draft another interior defender next year. And going into 2020, that class doesn't necessarily look great in my mind right now. I'm not sure. I really need to do a lot more looking into it. But DeMarcus Walker, you're on pretty thin ice. On pretty thin ice right now. And it's time to show up or shut up.
Yeah, and one thing with him, and this is something that it's not him. It's Broncos fans with this. They always talk about how the change of coaching is going to do him wonders. His defensive line coach is the same defensive line coach. It is still Bill Kohler. That hasn't changed. He is still the guy that's been working with him basically since his rookie year, trying to teach him the technique and the fundamentals, and DeMarcus Walker just hasn't gotten it down yet. I think the scheme that the Broncos are running under Vance Joseph and Joe Woods was not the best fit for him, but the scheme they run now is pretty similar, at least in regards to the front seven, with what they're asking the defensive line to do. So he's still not the best fit, but it does help him a little bit because Vic Fangio has a little bit more of a tendency to use players more to what their skill set can let them do. So that's something that's helping him out. And one guy quickly before we get over to Edge that I want to just mention briefly is Mike Purcell. I actually came away pretty impressed with this game against the 49ers. And the Broncos, who lack a little bit of size on that defensive line with Zach Kerr, the only one who's 330 pounds plus, Mike Purcell could actually end up making this roster as that big body space eater for short situations, goal line situations, stuff like that, to just eat up so much space. And against San Francisco, he did actually a really good job. But the thing that needs to be remembered is the context of it, and the level of competition that he was facing against on that San Francisco offensive line was third and fourth stringers at that point. So I think that maybe he's a guy that you can want to see get a little bit more reps, but there's something there with him that's just kind of seeing a little bit more, and he's getting better each game so far. So he's definitely pushing for a roster spot as well.
Well, and if nothing else, he's got a legitimate shot to make the practice squad this year. He has been very, very good this preseason. He may not be able to. I know we're discussing the 53-man roster here today, but he's got a legitimate shot to be on that 10-man practice squad if he can clear through the waivers. And before we continue on, clearing through waivers after the cutdown process happens is a lot easier than people think.
Just
every team has their own players that they want to try to bring back that have been in the scheme, they've been in the system, they've been there the entire time building a rapport with their teammates and with their coaches. They don't want to have to bring in a new guy unless it is an immediate upgrade and somebody they can probably put on their 53-man roster, if not immediately, very, very soon in the near future. Getting Mike Purcell through the waiver process is probably going to be a fairly easy breeze for the Broncos to do.
I just want to throw this out there. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure he's not actually practice squad eligible. He's been in the NFL since 2013. He had 3 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers, and he's just kind of bounced. I mean, the last 2 years he's bounced around practice squads, but I think with how many years he's been in the NFL and all that stuff, he might not be eligible. But again, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah, that might be an error on my part. If he is not practice squad eligible, I'm going to sound like a fool on episode 1. It'll be all right.
It's all good. The practice squad rules and everything like that, who's eligible is, even myself, I have such a hard time figuring out who's eligible and who isn't. So that's something that I know there's a lot of people out there that are great at doing that. I'm not one of them.
Right, yeah, it happens. Bob Morris is probably the best one to be able to tell us the practice squad rules and eligibilities. That man knows so much about the collective bargaining agreement, it's not even funny. But going forward here, we just got done talking about the defensive line and all the players that possibly have an opportunity to make the roster as far as, that sixth guy that comes in. But going one level of the defense back behind him, I have legitimate concerns about the Broncos' linebacker depth, not only as the inside linebacker position, but also at the outside linebacker, the edge position. Yes, you do have Von Miller, and yes, you do have Bradley Chubb. They're going to be probably the best pass rush duo in the NFL this year. But behind them, there's not a whole lot to work with. You have Malik Reed, who's been playing very, very, very well, especially for an undrafted free agent coming out of Nevada. I think he still leads the team in sacks over the preseason. I may be mistaken on that, but undrafted rookie free agent. Then you move to the other side. And hurt as well. Then you move to the other side, and you have rookie outside linebacker / inside linebacker. We're not exactly sure where he's going to play because he's learning 2 positions as a rookie in Justin Hollins out of Oregon. Very big, very tall, extremely tall for an edge rusher. Has some pretty good mobility and athleticism for a guy his size, which is intriguing to maybe see him drop back into coverage. I broke down a bunch of his tape right after the draft earlier this year. And I think he probably can be an answer at the outside or the inside linebacker position as a pass coverage guy, but it's not his forte. He's still learning how to do that at this level. And then you also have Dakota Watson, who is in the same mold as that. Do I play outside? Do I play inside? Am I going to be good enough as a coverage player against the pass? There's a lot of concerns there. Moving towards the inside linebacker position, Alexander Johnson has looked really good, but along with the tight end position, the linebackers have been getting beaten and battered and bruised in the injury department right now. Joe Dinning just went on IR with a broken hand. You've got Todd Davis, who's had, I think, an ankle injury right now. They're questioning whether he's going to be available week 1. It probably will be, but there's questions surrounding that right now. His recovery is not going nearly as what they had planned so far. So then you've got Josie Jewell, who's also nicked up. He's got an oblique injury. Where are all these depth players at that the Broncos desperately need at the linebacker position, both in the running and in the passing game?
I definitely agree with off-ball linebacker. Edge, I can see the concerns for it, but maybe it's just my hopes a little bit more on Justin Hollins and Dakota Watson and what they've been able to show and everything like that. I think Justin Hollins has actually played pretty well. He's definitely looked better off ball, though, than playing off the edge. And Dakota Watson has been solid playing both. Then you have Malik Reed, who hopefully he's able to come back and be healthy and everything, but he's just an undrafted rookie. Is he going to be able to step up against playing against first stringers when he's been beating up on second and third stringers? So that's something that definitely has to be kept an eye on as well. But I still think that it's a little bit better. I mean, as I said, I get the concerns for it, but I like it. And what helps me be comfortable with the off-ball linebackers the most is that versatility of Hollins and Watson, and even Malik Reed. There's been a couple times where they've dropped Malik Reed to being an off-ball linebacker playing in between the tackles and stuff like that, and he's actually looked pretty solid there the couple times that he has this preseason. But in off-ball linebacker, there is no doubt the concerns there. I definitely think 100%, if they're not already, the Denver Broncos are looking for help at off-ball linebacker. I mean, they just brought in a guy in Daddy Nichols, and that can potentially help there. They're still looking for it. I guarantee you that they're still looking for help here, and they're going to be scrounging the cuts in the waiver wires when the cuts to 53-man rosters happen, because they're going to be trying to find somebody. And I wouldn't be surprised if they try to find somebody via trade beforehand to try to help them at least get them a game in the playbook before just going into the regular season. Because Todd Davis, as you mentioned, is he going to play that week 1? That's a big concern. Josie Jewell, he missed some time. He came back versus the 49ers, and he did not look good. A lot of people have been talking about how this scheme's going to help cover for his limited athleticism. I haven't seen it yet. He had one play where he got so lucky and so bailed out by a Bradley Chubb pass rush on Jimmy Garoppolo because he got beat by the running back on a wheel route, and Chubb's pressure forced Jimmy Garoppolo to throw that off point, and Isaac Yiadom came down with the ball. He got bailed out so much by that. Alexander Johnson has been the best depth player off ball that they have had, and even he has been just kind of solid at best. And Josh Watson, this is something that you're going to see a lot with the Broncos this year, is Josh Watson. I talked about Malik Reed, Justin Hollins, and Dakota Watson all playing off ball and edge. Josh Watson's doing the same. And Josh Watson has actually looked best coming off the edge than he has playing off ball, except for one big, that 30-yard touchdown run or whatever it was against the 49ers. That one was bad because he tried to back up and to make the tackle, and that was just atrocious play, just a rookie mistake kind of thing. But definitely a concern there.
Yeah, I agree with that. The depth concerns have gotten to the point now where you're seeing Jamal Carter, a former safety, now playing down in the box, and he talked pretty extensively about it the other day in a press conference, and they asked him how he felt going into becoming a linebacker. He said he liked the physicality, and he is a very physical player. It kind of points more to his skill set, and it's maybe a way for him to sneak onto this roster. But again, the depth is so bad, you have to be now transferring players and making them switch positions in the middle of the preseason to get ready to go into the regular season with a full 53-man roster. I don't know if Carter can actually do it. I think there's some size issues there. He got bullied in the running game. He has been bullied in the running game playing against bigger offensive linemen before. He's not exactly great in coverage either. So Special teams probably going to be his niche if he does actually be able to sneak onto the roster in the first place. Not going to be very effective as far as the passing game goes, and I don't think that he can hold up in the running game, just plain and simple.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, moving Jamal Carter isn't just because of the injuries at that. They also moved him there because he was absolutely playing atrocious at safety. He was so awful, and it was basically came down to, hey, we'll give you a shot here or we're cutting you. That's basically what it came down to. And playing off-ball linebacker, he showed those same mistakes. I mean, he's still playing awful in coverage. His run defense was really poor, getting pushed out of plays, getting bullied by offensive linemen. It's hard to see him making the roster just because of how much of a liability he is. It's just a mess, man. Watching these guys, I mean, he had such a great rookie year. I do think that getting that hurt last year early on, and then the first preseason game, I think it was, he got hurt and placed on injured reserve out for the year. I think that really set him back, which is such a bummer. But moving on to corner, this is one that part of me really thinks that they end up keeping 4 full-time corners. And those being Bryce Callahan, Chris Harris, Isaac Yiadom, and Devontae Bosby. There's a reason for that, and I'll get to that here in a second, but outside of those 4 corners, Horace Richardson was looking the best, and he just got placed on injured reserve.
Unfortunate. Unfortunate on that. Horace Richardson was looking very, very good.
He was pushing to make this roster, and I think that had he not been placed on injured reserve, I think he would have made it as a 5th corner. But outside of him, none of the other corners have stood out in a positive way. Lyndon Stevens and Trey Johnson, they've stood out. Oh boy, have they stood out. But they've been standing out because watching them play makes me want to vomit. The new guy that they brought up, Cossey or whatever his name is, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, apologize for that they brought in from the Falcons, he got beat like twice badly against San Francisco. One of them, fortunately, ended up being dropped, and I can't remember what happened on the other one. And he's supposed to be a guy that's supposed to be pretty quick. And he wasn't, and his footwork was terrible. Elijah Holder, he's flashed, but he's a guy who's definitely not ready. He's a guy that you want to try to stash on the practice squad, maybe depending on what other guys you have at corner being there. With Denver, I think that he's definitely the best option to stash on the practice squad. So there's definitely issues there with that, and the reason why I think they keep 4 is, again, Horace Richardson's injury, and then Kareem Jackson. He's going to be playing safety and corner. He's going to be going back and forth. And I think with that versatility, I think that's one reason why they go one short at defensive back, and that shortness coming from the corner.
Actually, I agree 100% with that, Eric, and I was hoping that you weren't going to say that exact same thing because I was trying to go for a hot take on that. But with Jackson Jackson actually playing both positions, and if you guys aren't following Benjamin Albright on Twitter, go get at him at Albright NFL, because he called this several months ago. Eric, I think you called it as well, that the Broncos were going to be featuring Jackson primarily at the safety position, and that is exactly what's been going on here lately. I do 100% agree with that the Broncos are probably only going to go into the season holding 4 full-time cornerbacks, though, because of Jackson's versatility. They're also going to take 4 other safeties with them as well. The 4 other safeties being Justin Simmons, who I think is going to show out, and he has been showing out in training camp so far this year. Multiple interception days earlier in camp. Then you've got Will Parks, who I've always been very high on Will Parks, and a lot of people haven't necessarily agreed with me on that. I think that Parks
I'm one of them.
Yeah, you are, actually. But I think Parks is a little bit better in coverage. Go back to 2014 when he was still an Arizona Wildcat. He was ranked per Pro Football Focus as the top slot cornerback in all of college football. That may not be a huge indicator of future success going as a professional player, but he does have good coverage ability. I don't think he's suited for the strong safety role that they're trying to use him in, but I digress. The 4th cornerback coming out of that is going to be DeMonte Thomas. I forgot his name there for a second. I do apologize about that. DeMonte Thomas, and then you're going to see Sua Cravens as well. So you're going to have Simmons, Parks, Cravens, and DeMonte Thomas along with Kareem Jackson. And Kareem Jackson is going to be more of the Swiss Army knife that a lot of people thought Justin Simmons could be, playing in Vance Joseph's scheme. Now he's actually going to be moved back to that free safety spot and be the single high center fielder role that suits his ability way better than being all over the place and playing in the slot, playing on the outside as a cornerback like he has been used in seasons past.
Yeah, I agree. And just to go over Will Parks real quick and why I didn't agree with him, it wasn't necessarily because of his ability per se. You could definitely see that he has potential in coverage. He can blow up the run game. It's just my biggest issue was a lack of consistency, which for me, listeners, you will come to find out that I am huge on consistency. I would much rather have a player who can be consistent and play at a good level for a full 16 games, every snap that they play, rather than a guy who can hits those high points, but only does so maybe 10, 15, 20% of the time. Consistency and versatility, those are my things for the game. And with Parks, that consistency wasn't there, and there was also a lot of mental errors. A lot of errors of him on special teams, of not filling his lane correctly, on defense, not finding his right spot in the zone, of his teammates having to get him lined up correctly, things like that. That's why I was been a little bit lower on him. I'm really happy to see that he's actually turning things around. He was actually a pick that I actually didn't mind, because especially being a 6th-round pick, because I like the tape quite a bit. You were able to see a lot more of that potential, but it hasn't started to really show up on tape. I mean, he was taking steps forward, but it was still the lack of consistency and the mental errors. And Justin Simmons, again, I mean, he has a chance to be excellent this year. There's still some errors of him just over pursuing, especially on runs to the outside, that he's got to clean up a little bit. And then Sua Cravens and DeMonte Thomas, I think that Sua Cravens has so far really played himself onto the roster. He's killing it in practice, and he's shown up in games that he's has played in. And then DeMonte Thomas, part of me really thinks that they're grooming him to take over for Justin Simmons after this year, because Justin Simmons is set to be a free agent, so as Will Parks. I definitely think that's it. And then Trey Marshall, he's a guy who he was pushing for a roster spot until the San Francisco 49ers game, where his play really plummeted. He has a chance to make it back up there, but I think that he's a guy they're going to be looking at for the practice squad. And then for special teams, there's not much discussion to have on special teams. There's nobody really cares about special teams, pretty much, for the most part. I mean, they should, especially with the Broncos, because their coverage units are atrocious, their return units are atrocious. But when it comes down to it, they have one kicker on the roster in Brandon McManus, they have one punter in Colby Wadman, and they have one long snapper in Casey Crater. There's no competition there. There's not going to be any surprises. Those are your guys at special teams.
Yeah, and McManus, it speaks for himself. Huge leg, pretty accurate, can kick the ball a mile. So Wadman, up and down, you never know what you're going to get with him. And obviously Kreider's just there to snap the ball and run down the field and make a tackle if he can. But anyways, guys, that's going to wrap up today's episode. You can follow us both on Twitter at Sanderson MHH. And for Eric, at Erick Trickel. Also, make sure you're following at Mile High Huddle on Twitter, and like the Mile High Huddle Facebook page if you have a chance. Thank you once again for joining us on the first episode of Dove Valley Deep Divers. Until next time, guys, enjoy.